Jewish medical is number one, our source or sources. Generally, we do not do it or make decisions in medical ethics in an arbitrary fashion or based on human logic or based on societal practice, etc. We seek sources in traditional Jewish texts. The primary text is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, but the truth of the matter is we don't really use that much for determining Jewish law. Jewish law is determined primarily by what's called the oral tradition. The oral tradition, of course, has been in written form for the past 2,000 years or so, about 170 to 200. Much of it was written in the form of the 6 orders or the 6 volumes of the Mishnah. And then that was elaborated upon by the Talmud. That was the Babylonian Talmud, completed in around the 6th, 7th century. And those are the primary sources for Jewish law. And that's how we would come to decisions generally in medical ethics, would be by an expert in Talmudic law who would obviously have to consult with a physician to know the empirical reality. But once we know the empirical reality, what is the medical situation, what is the empirical reality, what are the probabilities, so on and so forth, then we would come to a decision about medical ethics using those traditional sources. So that is an important point to keep in mind. A second point to keep in mind, just in terms of how we come to a conclusion, is that Jewish law treats all components of life equally. What I mean by that is there's no difference to us between, let's say, the laws governing Yom Kippur. No, that is incorrect. I'm not a lecturer for Gateways, have not worked for them for 4 years now. But okay, that's fine.
I apologize. This is an old bio. I posted.
Okay. All right, it's okay. I teach at Yeshiva University, so anyway. But in any case, the second point is that when we that we treat all of Jewish law as one unit, meaning there's no distinction for us, let's say, between what people might call ritual law and ethics. That is to say that the same source is used to decide whether or not I can eat on Yom Kippur, whether or not the food is kosher or not, whether or not the money is kosher, whether or not I can do a transplant or this operation, is it permitted, is it not permitted, experimental treatment. They all come from the same source. And to a great degree, they're interconnected. That means a person who is making decisions of a rabbi, posek, meaning a halachic authority who's making the decisions, generally should know all of these areas of law. Because if a person only knows one area of law, they may be missing out completely on a crucial component of the decision, because all the laws are interconnected. An idea that that we have regarding or a principle regarding financial law may be found in the laws of Shabbat, and a principle about the laws of life and death may be found in the judicial laws of jurisprudence, etc. So it requires really a fluency in many areas of Jewish law, in fact, all areas of Jewish law, and a fluency in understanding of the basic text. That means, and I have to say this because there are very often people think that if they are born Jewish, have eaten large amounts of bagels, they are now experts in Judaism. This is not the case. Even if you've consumed massive amounts of bagels with lox and cream cheese, etc., it doesn't. No, Judaism is a legal system, and as a legal system, it has and it's a legal system that has been around for about 3,000 or so years, and extensively well-developed discussions, arguments, consensus regarding aspects of the law, and therefore it requires that type of expertise. So that's just the first introductory point when we come to medical ethics. Medical ethics is not a separate area that is completely exclusive of all the rest of Jewish law. It is part of Jewish law in general. Okay, having said that, a couple of major principles. First and foremost, life, not just quality of life, but life itself is of incredible and sometimes paramount importance in Jewish law, to the extent that we are told that that life takes precedence over virtually all the commandments. That is to say, and we derive this from a verse which says, "V'chai behem," you shall live by them, you shall keep my statutes. That's actually a verse in Leviticus 19:16, which is quoted in number 1, which basically, where the Torah says, these are the commandments, the statutes, and the laws the Lord God has given you, that a person shall do, v'chai behem, and live by them. It's interesting. Some say that the grammatical format of v'chai behem, live by them, is actually a command. Thou shalt live by them. The Talmud in Tractate Yoma, which is, by the way, where many of the laws of life and death and medical ethics are found, Yoma means in Aramaic the day. By the day, it means Yom Kippur, which, by the way, is on the 10th of the month. And Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, there is an entire tractate of the Talmud that deals with it. But since there's an obligation to fast on Yom Kippur, so the rabbis were sensitive to the fact that fasting, for some people, could be dangerous. And consequently, many of the rules regarding these issues are found in that particular tractate. That's an example whereby a person might think, okay, life and death issues, healing, where would I find that? I don't know if you intuitively think, yeah, oh, it must be in the end of the tractate that deals with Yom Kippur. Like, what? So in any case, over there, the Talmud understands that you shall live by them means that life takes precedence, that the commandments were given not to die, but to live by them, which means that in the vast majority of cases, life overrides, saving of life overrides the commandments. There are exceptions, and those are some important exceptions. An exception would be idolatry. You cannot, Jews have given up their life rather than worship idols throughout the centuries. So that's something which takes precedence. Sexual immorality, adultery, for example, incest, these are things that one must give up one's life rather than transgress. And murder. You cannot murder an innocent third party to save your life. You could kill a person who is threatening your life, but you cannot kill, so for example, and this of course has ramifications in medical ethics. I'll give you an example. The classic case in the Talmud, it says if there was some Persian ruler, anti-Semite, who says to a Jew, he says, you go and kill that person or I'll kill you. The Talmud says you're not allowed to kill that person. You have to die rather than transgress. And the reason the Talmud says is logic. It says, who's to say that your blood is redder than his? Maybe his blood's redder than yours. I cannot make an evaluation that he's worth less than me, so therefore I can kill him to save my life. So what that means is, let's say theoretically, you could have a situation where maybe objectively my blood is redder than the other person's. So let's keep that in mind. So now there's another situation where you can kill someone, which is a very famous case, and that's derived from what's called bar b'machteret, the person who breaks into a populated house. The people in the house have the right to kill the intruder. What's the logic behind that? The logic behind that is that inasmuch as someone who breaks into a house knows that the people in the house will generally protect their property, if it comes to him or them, it'll be him, which means anyone breaks into a house is prepared to murder. So he is what's called in Hebrew rodef, meaning a pursuer. So you could kill him. That would be considered self-defense. Yes, it's a preemptive strike, but a preemptive strike is also, in this case, self-defense. So now we have two laws. One law says that I cannot kill an innocent third party to save my life, because who's to say my blood's redder than his? But we have another law that when someone is indeed threatening life, you can kill the one who's threatening your life. So let's just, excuse the pun, transplant this to a medical situation, whereby, let's say, a woman carrying a fetus to full term or to paturation, pregnancy, etc., will endanger her life. In the estimates of the medical experts, this will endanger her life. There are numerous cases where that could happen. So now the fetus, interestingly, might be considered, or not might, is considered in this case a rodef, meaning a pursuer. The fetus is threatening the life of the mother. Now, I know you will obviously realize that a fetus is not doing this consciously. It's not like the anti-Semite, who's threatening life. The fetus has no ability to make a decision one way or the other. However, as Reb Chaim Soloveitchik points out, this is a case where we could say that the mother's blood is indeed redder than the fetus. What do we mean by that? Why? Because the fetus only exists because of the mother, and it's completely and utterly dependent on the mother. So therefore, if we're weighing it up, there's two strikes against the fetus. A, the fetus is in practice pursuing and threatening the life of the mother, even though not in intention, has no intention, right? Number one. And number two, objectively speaking, we actually have a criteria by which we could say that, yeah, the mother's life is worth more because the mother's independent life, the fetus is dependent upon the mother. And hence Jewish law would say that in a situation where the fetus, carrying that fetus, is threatening the mother's life, you would be not only allowed, but obligated to abort the fetus. So that would be a case where we're taking, so we've got a law of the saving of life, the law of threatening life, and so on and so forth, just to give you an example. Now, in addition to life so life has great importance. By the way, not only a regular life, but even a short lifespan has importance. So for example, I believe it's probably here, yes, number 3, we have the case, let's say, and unfortunately, and tragically, this has become a reality in Turkey and Syria right now, but where basically a building collapses. The Talmud says building collapses and people are trapped under the building. So obviously, Jewish law allows you to do whatever you need to do on Shabbos to get these people out from under the rubble of the building and save their life. So now the Gemara says, what happens if the rescue workers uncover the person and the physician on scene says this person will not survive for more than a few hours? They won't even make it beyond Shabbat. Are you allowed to continue uncovering, transgressing Shabbat to uncover and save that person? The answer is yes. What if, and now, so one of the a 13th century rabbi called Menachem HaMeiri from Provence, he says, yes, because even in one moment of life, a person could repent and regret their sins, acquire the world to come, and so on and so forth. And hence, even a moment of life is of value. But one of a more recent contemporary, not contemporary, but a more recent authority known as the Chafetz Chaim, Rav Yisrael Meir Kagan, who was a head of a yeshiva in Radun in Poland. He passed away just after the First World War. He published one of the great works on Jewish law called the Mishnah Brura. So he writes there, the Meiri, he says, is just saying that to make it easier to understand. But the truth of the matter is, even if let's say we uncovered the person under the building, the medical expert says this person's not going to survive more than a few hours, and he will not regain consciousness during that time. Jewish law says you still are allowed, obligated to transgress Shabbat to uncover him and give him those extra few hours, even if he's unconscious. So it's I know that's strange, but that is based on the idea that life itself has value. Life itself is I wouldn't say infinite value, because there, as we know, there are things that override life, as I mentioned before, but we see from there that even a temporary life, even life which is lived in unconscious, still allows and obligates one to transgress Shabbat to save that life. So that's a principle which is very, very important to keep in mind in all of Jewish medical ethics, is the paramount importance of life, even if that life is unconscious, even if that life is very short, but it does override other commandments. We also know that there is that unlike in secular law in general, there's very few obligations. Mostly secular law is about prohibition. This is prohibited. You cannot do something, or rights. Jewish law is heavily centered on obligation, that we ought to do something, and so therefore in Jewish law there's it's not just that the physician is allowed to intervene, which is what, let's say, Catholics may express it that way, that physicians are allowed to intervene despite this fact, but and there are certain sects who feel that it's wrong for a physician to intervene. Jewish law doesn't just say that it's allowed, the physician is allowed to intervene in disease and prevent it, but actually would say it's an obligation. What is the basis of the obligation? Obviously, I say physician, everyone is obligated to save life, but not everyone is qualified or able to. So that's a point to keep in mind. But number one, there is a biblical verse that says, "Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa," do not stand idly by the blood of your friend. So the Talmud says in Sanhedrin, if you see a person drowning, if you see a person set upon by wild animals, if you see a person being attacked by bandits, so how do I know that I'm obligated to help them, to save them? It says, don't stand by the blood of your friend. So that means it's actually a religious obligation for a physician to engage in this. And we also have another source, which going to sound a little strange, but which is the following. There's a mitzvah, an obligation to return lost property to its owner. So you see someone's dog wandering around and you recognize the dog, so, oh, that's Rex, right? That belongs to the Goldbergs, right? So etc. So you're obligated to return it to the owner, to mitzvah. So the Talmud says we're using a legal form called a fortiori, how much more so, kal vachomer. The Gemara says the following: and one has to use their thumb to explain it. If I'm obligated to return someone's dog, donkey, wallet, car to them, how much more so am I obligated to restore to them their limb, their vision, their mobility, their function, their health, their consciousness? In other words, that's called hashavas aveda de gufo, which means returning the lost body. Returning the lost body does not mean you got lost while involved in an out-of-body experience or astral travel, which is conceivable, I don't know. But what it refers to is the obligation to restore someone's health, the use of their limbs, the use their senses, their consciousness, etc. And that is derived from and that is considered, by the way, one of the legitimate rules. There are 13 rules of exegesis, that is to say, rules of derivation of things from the Torah text, which we actually recite them in the mornings in the section of prayers called korbanos, the sacrifices. Although if you do come to synagogue late, that's the first thing usually sacrificed. But in any case, those 13 rules, one of them is how much more so, and that's a legitimate derivation. If the Torah obligates me to return someone's money, property, then how much more so am I obligated to restore to them something which is even more important, i.e. their body, their health, and so on and so forth. That is an obligation. So don't stand by the blood of your friend. Restore that which is to someone something, and also you shall live by them and not die by them. All these are obligations, etc. In addition, one more source, which is number 2, the Gemara in Bava Kama discusses a verse in Exodus 22 where the Torah speaks about the following case: a man hits, there is a fight, one guy attacks someone and he hits him and he causes him injury. So the Torah tells us there are you have to pay for a number of things. It says shivto yitain, that means his unemployment. You have to pay for the time that he's not employed, you must pay him unemployment. V'rapo yirapeh, and you shall heal him, and you shall heal him. So there's a repetition of that word. And the Talmud derives from here, Rabbi Ishmael says, that from here we see that permission has been given for the physician to heal, because the Torah says, heal him. Now, there's some discussion, we don't have time for all of it, but there is a little bit of discussion about what that means, because some say, Maimonides, who, by the way, many of our famous rabbis, especially in medieval period, were physicians as well. Maimonides, Nachmanides, Ibn Ezra, Sforno, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, all physicians. Okay. So Maimonides, when he was in Cairo, that's where he lived most of his life, there was a community of Jews known as Karaites. The Karaites were Jews who did not believe in the oral tradition, Talmud, Mishnah, etc. They also didn't believe in human intervention in disease. They didn't believe in cleanliness, etc. So Maimonides, who was not only a Torah scholar, but a great rabbi, a great physician, actually did a lot of debates with the Karaites and was able to make major changes in Cairo, including hygiene, sewage disposal, cleanliness of food, and he established a public hospital there. And he treated patients, of course. But Maimonides says, when it says that permission has been given for the doctor to heal, it doesn't mean that without that verse, you'd think it was prohibited. What it means is it's like a permission that even though there could be damage that can ensue from what the doctor is doing, if he is acting in good faith and acting appropriately, even though he may have caused damage, then he is exempt. That's the permission given. And especially since there are many medical procedures which may cause damage, they may heal a person from the more serious condition, but there may be side effects which are painful, damaging, etc. In fact, Maimonides says most intrusive medicine has a negative side effect. It's just we choose the lesser. In other words, we choose to, let's say, heal my stomach pains, even though I'm going to get a headache or something like that. He says, really, the best form of medicine is prophylactic, is preventative medicine. He says it's a healthy lifestyle, eating and drinking in a healthful manner, exercising, and a good environment. So that's Maimonides said in the 13th century. So others say that when it says permission has been given for the doctor to heal, what that means is that it's actually an obligation. So we have another mitzvah, which is the obligation of the physician to heal. So that means implication in terms of medical ethics is that you can't, it's not an option to stand by and let someone suffer or let someone die. We are obligated to intervene. We are obligated to try to heal the person. And by the way, and this is another important principle, we do not believe in complete autonomy of the human being. Meaning I have free will, yes, but I have the free will to decide to follow good, or unfortunately, I could also decide to follow evil, right? But free will is not the same as autonomy. Right? In a lot of secular ethicists believe that humans should have complete and total autonomy. In Jewish tradition, we believe that the human soul does not belong to us, and our life does not belong to us, and our body does not belong to us. No one, man, woman, etc. That means there are limitations on what I can and cannot do. So, for example, in the same way as I am not allowed to murder someone, I'm also not allowed to murder myself. Suicide is prohibited. If a person refuses medical treatment, there are some exceptions which we will get to, but if a person refuses medical treatment, they are actually transgressing a prohibition in Jewish law. And certainly we don't have the autonomy to decide that I may want to, I don't know, that for a person to do some serious damage to their body is again prohibited. So that's another important principle, which is autonomy is not complete in Jewish law. There is some, so give you an example. So suicide is actually prohibited. That is derived from Genesis 9:5, that God says, I will seek the blood, your own blood from your own hand, meaning you shed your own blood. God says, I will seek payment for that, meaning it is actually prohibited and it is considered to be like murder. On the other hand, we do have some cases where people have committed suicide and it has not been condemned. So for example, one of the cases I have, the most famous case, is number 4, which is in the book of Samuel, in which Shaul HaMelech, Saul, first king of the Jewish people, this is about 800 years after the Jews came out of Egypt, etc. So he was the king before King David. So Saul was in battle, and he was on a mountain called Har Gilboa, Mount Gilboa. He's with his armor bearer. They used to have a young, like a teenager, who would help carry the weapons, the armor, etc., and his sons. And he was surrounded by the enemy, the Amalekites, and he was hit by some arrows and badly wounded. So Shaul, King Saul, says to his armor bearer, kill me. I don't want to be captured by the pagans. And the armor bearer is too scared. He says, no way, I'm not killing you. The armor bearer, again, eventually gets shot by an arrow. And his 2 sons are killed. So now it's Saul alone. A very tragic story on Mount Gilboa. And you may have heard the expression, throwing yourself on the sword. It comes from this this tragic incident. So Shaul HaMelech puts his sword in the ground, throws himself on it, and kills himself. Now, it's interesting. The Midrash says that was actually okay. That was permitted. Because in the verse that says in Genesis 9, where it says, I will seek your blood from your own hand, that starts with the word ach, aleph chaf, not brother. That would be aleph chet. But aleph chaf means however. However, I will seek your blood from your hand. So the Medrash says that there are cases where it's allowed to commit suicide. Shaul was a case where it was permitted. Why was it permitted is the subject of great discussion amongst many authorities, and it had ramifications throughout history as well. Some authorities say that the reason he was allowed to commit suicide was because since he was the king of our people, monotheistic people, anointed by a prophet of God, for him to be captured alive, humiliated and paraded around by pagans, by polytheists, would be what we call a chilul Hashem, a desecration of the name of God, tantamount to idolatry. And so to avoid that, he would have been allowed to kill himself. So interestingly, that would be, but it was not because he was in pain. No one says he was allowed to kill himself because of the pain. He was allowed to kill himself because of the problem of idolatry, etc. So that means it's not always an option. And if you look I have a source here from another tragic case. What happened with Saul was he was eventually, his body and the body of his sons were taken by the enemies and hanged on the walls of a city called Beit Sha'an, the ruins of which still exist. There's a town called Beit Sha'an in northern Israel. And King David led a small group of commandos to retrieve the bodies, and they brought them back. Torture, yes. Excellent, Rabbi Lewis. Am I allowed? Do I have to take questions from the rabbi? That doesn't seem fair. But okay, fine. All right, I will. Right, but yes. So torture. So that's the next case. That's in Avodah Zorah 18a. If you have a look there, number 5. We have the case of Rabbi Hanania ben Trajan. Unfortunately, Jews have been in situations like this many times throughout history. So Rabbi Hanania ben Trajan is wrapped in a soaking Torah scroll, and he's put into a fire and he's burnt. It's a slow death, horrific, just horrific. And the student said, Rabbi, breathe the smoke in deeply. Breathe in the smoke deeply. You'll die quicker. It'll be less pain. And Rabbi Hanania ben Trajan says a famous statement. He says that better that he who gave me the soul take it away, meaning God who gave it to me take it away, rather than I take it from myself and affect it. and he didn't do that. But then the Roman executioner, seeing this exchange, he said, "Rabbi, will you guarantee me a place in the world to come if I take away the sponges, the wet stuff, and allow you to die quicker?" And Rabbi Hanania said yes. Right, and then the Roman executioner did that, and then the executioner himself jumped into the fire and died. It's like very interesting. So there, the commentaries say, Ritva, Tosfos, etc. Rabbi Lewis quoted Tosfos, right? They say that to avoid he was not allowed to commit suicide to avoid the pain, but they were allowed to remove impediments to his death. It's a very significant and nuanced distinction. He was not allowed to hasten his death, but he could remove an impediment to his death. That means if there was something external preventing his death, then it would be allowed for and he was in a lot of pain. The Roman executioner was allowed to remove that, and he was allowed to tell him to remove that. So that is actually derived from there, that in certain situations, for the person is moribund, they're dying, and they are in tremendous pain, then many authorities maintain that if there is no cure, and it's just a question of prolonging life when he's in great pain, while we're not allowed to hasten death, but we could remove impediments to that. Now that we would not be allowed to, let's say, remove oxygen hydration, because that would be tantamount to actively killing. But if there is some medication which is keeping him alive, if there is some machinery keeping him alive, etc., and the person is in great pain, they could make that choice. That's the case also of torture, whereby the Talmud says, there were cases where it appeared to be allowed, and it did happen. Question of suicide to avoid certain sins also is very questionable. Like Masada, you've probably all heard of Masada, where according to Josephus Flavius, during the Roman, right a few years after the destruction of the temple, 900 Jews are in this fortress in Masada. They held off the Romans for years and eventually committed suicide to avoid capture. The truth is, the statement made by one of the leaders, according to Josephus, which there's no way he would know this, was better to die by our own hand as free people than to live as slaves under the Romans. Halachically, that would not be a justifiable reason to kill themselves. They would not be allowed. On the other hand, if they suspected they may be tortured into doing all types of sins, then some authorities maintain that would be allowed to kill themselves rather than go through that. Unclear. Maybe that's why, even though Masada occurred in 73 CE, the Mishnah was written about 100 years later. The Talmud, they all knew about Masada, but they know not a word is mentioned about Masada in the entire range of Talmudic literature, not a word. And that's probably, my conjecture is, because they didn't really know what went on then. So they didn't want to condemn them because they may have had righteous reasons for doing that. They didn't want to praise them because they may have done it for the wrong reasons. So therefore, there's silence about Masada in all but Zionist literature. Like in Talmudic literature, like there's nothing, right? It's just very interesting. But in any case, and that's also Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, who talks about any case of we're never allowed to hasten death. As a general rule, we would not be allowed to hasten death. That is the code of Jewish law, and Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. But removing impediments would be permitted. For example, also, in fact, Rav Moshe Feinstein goes as far as saying, who was a halachic decisor, passed away, I think it was 85, lives in New York. So he writes that it's prohibited to maintain the life of a person who's dying and suffering by artificial means. So keeping someone alive who's actually in the throes of death, he's moribund, there is no cure, and he's in tremendous pain, that would not be allowed. There also, if a person, let's say, is in a situation where there's very little chance of recovery and they're in tremendous pain, there is autonomy, the autonomy to allow that person does not want to go through the horrifically painful treatment, they are allowed to have that option. And there are other cases where autonomy is taken into account. There's in terms of different types of heart valve replacements, silicon versus from an organic source like a pig valve, etc., where one option might mean another operation a few years down the road, but pretty much a normal lifestyle in between. The other option would last, not necessarily requiring ever another operation, but a lifestyle which would have to be a lot of medication and restrictions on the lifestyle. That's the type of thing where the person could make that decision. Do they want to have an operation every few years, but normal lifestyle in between, or do they want to have no operation later and just live a normal life with minimum intrusion, etc.? Again, that's the person's decision. That's their option. So that type of autonomy we would be allowed, etc. Again, another aspect of important point in medical ethics, again, which I already mentioned earlier, is we don't sacrifice one person to save another. There are all types. So let me give you one situation happened in South Africa. It's addressed by a number of rabbis, and there's actually arguments about it between Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Eliezer Yehuda Voldenberg. I understand I have about a minute to go. Is that right, Rabbi Lewis? So I'll try.
We could have a few minutes more. That's okay.
Okay. So here was the case. There was a Jewish doctor, religious Jew. He is working in a small hospital in a town in South Africa. It's a very small hospital. They have one bed in the ICU. They have an ICU, one bed. Policy of the hospital is the bed is usually in the ICU is reserved for car accident victims who have a chance of recovery, people who have chronic illnesses, people who are moribund, etc. They do not put them on in the ICU. However, if someone happens to be in the ICU, like for whatever reason they put someone in there, and this is a person who has a minimum chance of recovery, and then there's an accident victim who has a maximum chance of recovery. So the hospital's policy was to take that other person out and put the accident. So what the doctor asked, he asked these rabbis, what's the story? Is the policy of the hospital in accordance with Jewish law or not? And if it's not, can I even participate and work in this hospital? So Rav Moshe Feinstein maintained that it is permissible to designate the ICU for people with a higher chance of recovery. You've got limited medical resources, then you have no choice but to do triage. And the triage would be the person would be judged on who's got the higher chance of recovery. Obviously in the army, we would do triage as well. But in this situation, he said that policy was actually correct, and they were allowed to reserve the bed for accident victims. He says, however, if for some reason, bureaucratic mistake or whatever it was, a person who was minimum chance of recovery, short lifespan, was in the ICU, you would not be allowed to take that person out to put in the person who's got a higher chance of recovery. Why? Because taking the person out of the ICU is really shortening their life. So you're shortening life person A, in order to save life B. That is not allowed. So that was the conclusion of Rav Moshe Feinstein. There was those, Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Voldenberg, who's a medical ethics expert from Israel. Both of these rabbis have passed away, but Rabbi Voldenberg was of the opinion that you're not allowed to prioritize it. It's a first come, first served basis. And whoever needs it now, you put in, and that's the way the cookie crumbles, and you should not be prioritizing. Although it's interesting, Rav Voldenberg says that would all be different in war, in an emergency situation. In war, he says, it's very different, and there may be different rules regarding saving life, etc. In the case of a war. One more point, just to give you one more idea, just to take a couple of minutes. Experimental treatments. So there's a really, I would say, a little bit of a bizarre source for experimental treatments being permitted in certain cases, which is the following. There's a Mishnah in Tractate Avodah Zarah. That's the tractate that deals with idolatry. So it says this: is a Jew allowed to go to a pagan doctor? Now you'll say, why not? The answer is because we're talking about old-time pagans, not talking about some new age idiot in California. We're talking about like the old-time pagans, right? The pagan doctor there would be as likely to kill you. If he felt like it, he might kill you. Right? On the other hand, he might heal you. I guess it depends on the day of the week or his mood, or I don't know what it depends on. So going to a pagan doctor was a risk of being killed or actually of being healed, right? So the Talmud says depends. If the person has an illness in which they will not live what's called a regular lifespan, they'll only have chayei sha'ah, which means a short lifespan. What that exactly means is unclear. Some say it means less than a year. Now, if they don't get treated, they'll live less than a year. That's what the physicians say. If he doesn't get treated less than a year, the treatment is this pagan doctor, but the pagan doctor might kill him. But if he doesn't kill him, if it's a good day, right, then the cure might actually give him a longer lifespan. So the Talmud says you're allowed to go, the person whose prognosis is a short lifespan may go to the pagan doctor. From here, contemporary authorities derive, and it's fascinating how we look at a Mishnah that really talks about a reality that no longer even exists, but we derive an important principle because the pagan doctor is an experimental treatment. The experimental treatment may kill the person, but you know what? If it works, it may prolong their life. So now what would halacha say based on that Mishnah regarding the weird pagan doctor, right? What we would say is a person whose prognosis seems to be a short lifespan, i.e. less than a year, let's say for argument purposes, then that person may actually take the experimental treatment, even though it might kill him, because the probability of having a normal lifespan and being healed, right, overrides the risk of shortening his already less than normal lifespan. So that would be a case of how we derive halacha from some arcane and very, very different area of law, but would apply to contemporary experimental treatments. That would be another example of medical ethics. Obviously, this is a massive field. There's been many, many books written about it. There are journals about this. There are classes about this. And there are physicians who are experts in this. And there are conferences. There's one coming up soon, Chemed Conference on Jewish Medical Ethics, with some major physicians and medical ethics experts from the Jewish world coming to that. I forgot the date. If there's any physicians out there you want to attend, that would be a good thing for Rabbi Lewis to research. I think it's called Chemed, right? Medical Ethics Conference. And that's it for this evening. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has a question, please stick around. If Rabbi Becher, you can stick around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll ask a question. In Jewish law, which circumstances would be considered acceptable for a woman to abort?
Jewish law, any circumstance in which the woman's life is threatened by carrying the pregnancy to full term, she will be obligated to have an abortion. It would not be permitted. In Jewish law, rarely would it be permitted. It's either prohibited or obligatory. Mm-hmm. So now when we talk about risk to the woman's life, there are different opinions, but it's fairly broad, meaning we are very liberal about her life, i.e., or rather, that's not the right word, but what we are, let's say she would have serious, medical experts feel that she'd have some serious psychological issues, which might cause depression. And depression is considered to be a life-threatening situation. So that would be, we would allow an abortion in such a case. There are many halachic authorities who maintain that during the first trimester, if there'd be evidence that the child will be born with a serious disease, genetic disorder, etc., then during the first trimester you'd be allowed to, and we'd be actually also, or if the mother would have extensive suffering as a result of that, then we'd be more liberal in the first trimester to do an abortion. But generally, even a doubt of danger to the mother's life, 40 days, first 40 days, would be not first trimester. You're right. Thank you. First 40 days would be very lenient about it, according to Revoldenberg. But yes, danger to the mother's life, again, to her psychological health, which is considered also life-threatening in depression cases. That would also allow, and not allow, but even obligate an abortion. This, by the way, I want to say something a little controversial, that there are opinions that maybe voting for a pro-life candidate or government might not be the best thing in Jewish law, because in Jewish law we'd prefer that the government would be hands-off. Because let's say the government is influenced by Christian ethics, which in certain states they are influenced by that, and the classic Christian fundamentalist view is much more severe than the Jewish view of abortion. So we're more permissive and much more leaning towards the mother's health. So we would not want a Jewish woman to be in a situation where it would have to be illegal, etc. We would like her to have the ability to decide based on Jewish ethics and Jewish law whether or not based on what the government says. So that would be just a slightly controversial, but I don't know. I probably would maybe more likely to vote for the pro-choice candidate in such a situation. Okay, I see that Adam Lubitz has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. This question might unfold in a couple parts, because I suspect the first bit, unusually for a question about Yiddishkeit, might just be a simple yes or no.
I'll try, yeah.
Can you drive yourself to dialysis on Shabbos?
You drive yourself to dialysis on Shabbos? That is actually an interesting question. I would say that generally no. One would, you should try to set it up that someone drives you there, because dialysis is something which I assume you know ahead of time when you'll need it. Right? It can be organized in such a way. So if you know something ahead of time and you know that it can be done on a regular basis, and it's not an emergency dialysis, then I would say that the proper thing to do would be to have a non-Jew drive one on Shabbos, or to organize it so it's not done on Shabbos. Things like, for example, even things which are really vital medical issues, but they're elective to some degree, or you could be flexible about the dates. We would try to avoid doing it on Shabbos. If it's life-saving surgery, that can be done. That should be done as soon as you can, Shabbos or not. Doesn't make a difference. But if it's something where there's a schedule and it can be scheduled, so we would try. So for, like the precedent for that would be, the Talmud says, in ancient times, Talmudic time, not ancient, but Talmudic times, if you went on a boat, chances are at some point in the journey, you'd have to join in and help the sailors tie the knots and do something. If there was a storm, etc., everyone's pitching in, all hands on deck, right? So the Talmud says you should therefore not get onto a boat if it's going to be sailing on Shabbos from Wednesday on. From Wednesday on is considered to be pre-Shabbos. You have to already be concerned about not transgressing Shabbat. So even though if you're on the boat on Shabbat and you need to help because you're in a storm, that's certainly allowed. That's certainly permitted because it's life-saving. But to put yourself in such a situation where you know ahead of time that that might happen, you should not do that. So what do we derive from there also is something like, for example, a procedure or elective surgery or something like that, ideally should try and do it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Doing it within 3 days of Shabbat means you're putting yourself in a situation where you may have to transgress Shabbat, albeit it would be permitted, but you should try to avoid it if you can. So that would be again, you were correct, Adam, that it was not a yes and no answer. Right. So
The nuance actually leads me to the other half of this question, which is, most people aren't medical doctors. And let's say you go on your Saturday stroll in the woods behind your house, and by whatever sort of quirk that kept us wandering in the desert for 40 years, you get lost and it starts raining and the temperature drops and you're like shivering cold. Is it pikuach nefesh to build a fire?
I would say probably depends how cold it would get, but yeah, hypothermia is definitely pikuach nefesh, definitely dangerous to life. We tend, when we look at danger to life, the Code of Jewish Law says, even if it's a doubt, even if it's a doubt of a doubt, even if it's, but we are we are stringent about life and lenient about Shabbat. That's generally the rule. All right. So yes, such a situation, we would say that's very likely, I would say, in these temperatures in the Northeast United States in the winter, that's pikuach nefesh. We also consider, let's say, a child. There are all types of situations the Talmud talks about, like a child, a little kid gets locked in a room. You're allowed to you're allowed to transgress Shabbat to get them out of that room, because if they're a little kid locked in a room by themselves, that's dangerous, right? The needs of an infant, right, etc. We also are very, we tend to be on the lenient side there and considering it life-threatening, etc. But yes, that would be that type of situation could be also security things, security concerns. It doesn't have to be necessarily sickness or disease. Right, security issues also considered to be life-saving. So, for example, if a soldier to carry a gun on Shabbat, someone who's on guard duty to defend, whether it's a Jewish institution, state of Israel, these are actually permitted. If you're in a place where you need security, which is unfortunately almost everywhere nowadays, then that type of thing would be allowed. Obviously, only someone with training, because if they don't have training, they're more dangerous than not. So, but yeah, that would be also included.
Very interesting nuance. Thank you, Reb.
Pleasure. I see something on the chat here. Yes, so today's a trimester for tax, but everyone else 40 days, right? Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Wait. Yeah. So I'm training to be a psychologist, and I was wondering if you have a patient who they're not doing anything that's like life-threatening or threatening to someone else that you have to report, but it's a decision that you strongly feel is going to negatively affect them. Would it be, do you think, or I guess halakhically, would it be acceptable to like contact the person's like family or close friends, even if you don't necessarily have a consent form on file and maybe you can't get one for whatever reason?
I'm sure why you would be contacting the family because you feel this person is a threat to them?
No. They're not like threatening anybody or themselves, but they're making like a really big life decision that you feel like is not going to go well. Like maybe they're marrying someone like very impulsively without knowing them, or I don't know, they're making some like dropping out of college or like making a really big decision that doesn't seem to be good judgment.
Well, there are issues of, I mean, the issue of client-patient confidentiality is extremely important, and you have to be,
right.
You have to realize that the United States law would probably prohibit you from doing that. So
but I know that, but halakhically, is it the same? Would halakha be in agreement of that, or would it be any different?
Would halakha be in agreement with that? If you feel that the person is doing something that will harm themselves or others, but not in when I say harm, I don't mean actually, but moral or spiritual harm, then and you know someone who could have influence on them, then Jewish law would say you should tell but should be very, in other words, there it would be it's what we call lashon hara, which means disclosing information about another person. We have to be very careful. There are a number of conditions, 7 actually, which the Chafetz Chaim mentions. But just to mention some of the conditions: A, you must have first-hand knowledge of the issue. B, you must not exaggerate. C, you must only tell those people who absolutely have to know and could have an impact. D, you must do it only for the sake of heaven, not for any personal gain or any other reasons of that sort. Nervous about your reputation or whatever, right? So those are some of the conditions. But if those conditions would be fulfilled, then yes, Jewish law would say that you would tell someone to help save that person from a decision that would harm them morally, spiritually, or someone else morally and spiritually as well. Physical danger, obviously, but we're talking about no physical danger.
Right.
We also are concerned with the moral and spiritual danger, and that's something which, again, these type of situations are very nuanced, and one would have to ask in each situation. Right? It's hard to give a general rule about these type of things. People make bad decisions about marriage all the time, even if they're not in psychological care. Right? People make stupid decisions. Whatever. Most teenagers, most of their decisions are stupid. Right? Prefrontal cortex needs a little bit, needs to grow a little more. So whatever. But that doesn't mean that I'm allowed in all those situations to betray their confidence. That's an important thing. And although we're not to the same degree that it is in American law, but it's also important in Jewish law not to betray confidence. And you'd have to have all those conditions fulfilled before you did that.
So does that mean working with Jewish patients, I don't know, you have to be more careful or something than non-Jewish patients?
Well, Jewish law applies to Jewish, but I guess with a non-Jewish patient, first of all, they have more leeway in what is permitted, right? There's more things permitted for them than for a Jew, right? So, but confidentiality you'd have to maintain also with a non-Jewish patient, and one would have to take into account these things as well. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure. Okie dokie. I think we're done. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for watching, listening, etc. And God willing, see you next time. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Get it.
See you. Pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Where's Rabbi Lewis? Okay. All right. See you, Rabbi Lewis. Thank you for inviting me.